Finally tonight here, Hollywood love stories. Bogey and Bacall, Tracy and Hepburn, but there was also Burt and Sally. They were on-screen magic, Burt Reynolds and Sally Field.
Burt Reynolds called Sally Field the love of his life in his memoir, in interviews, and in private conversations with people who knew him well. He said it consistently for decades after they broke up. He said it right up until the day he died in 2018. Sally Field, when she heard those words, called him complicated. That one word, chosen carefully by a woman who spent years processing what that relationship actually was, contains more truth about their story than anything either of them ever said publicly. What happened between these two people was not a simple Hollywood romance. It was something considerably more layered, and Sally finally told the full version of it, the memoir he never got to read. Burt Reynolds died on September 6, 2018. Sally Field's memoir, In Pieces, went on sale 12 days later, on September 18th. That timing was not accidental in any meaningful sense, but the closeness of the two dates created a situation that Sally addressed directly in interviews promoting the book. She was relieved that he died before he could read it. That is a striking thing to say about someone you once loved deeply, and Sally said it with enough specificity that it clearly came from real feeling rather than provocation. She did not want him to read what she had written about their years together, not because the book was cruel or vindictive, but because it was honest in ways that she knew would have wounded him. He died still believing she was the love of his life. He died with that story intact. And she was glad, she said, that he would not have to read the version of the story she had actually lived. The memoir covered her entire life, not just the Reynolds years. It went back to her childhood in Pasadena, to her mother, who was also an actress, to her stepfather, Jock Mahoney, a stuntman and actor who came into her life when she was very young, and whose presence in that household left damage that Sally spent decades understanding. She wrote about that damage directly and specifically in the book, describing a childhood that produced particular patterns in how she related to powerful men later on. She wrote about the Reynolds relationship in that context, not as a standalone romance that went wrong, but as something she could trace back to emotional patterns formed in her earliest years. The way she described it was not angry or bitter, but analytical, the account of a woman who had done serious self-examination and arrived at a clear-eyed understanding of what had happened and why she had stayed in it as long as she did. Reynolds, by all available accounts, would not have received that framing gently. He was not a man who processed criticism of himself through a particularly reflective lens. Sally herself acknowledged this in interviews, saying he would have wanted to respond, to defend himself, to push back against the version of events she was describing. The fact that she knew him well enough to predict that reaction, even decades after their relationship ended, says something about how clearly she had seen him even during the years when she was most under his spell. The gap between his story and her story is the actual heart of this account. He spent more than 30 years telling anyone who would listen that she was the one who got away, that he had made the biggest mistake of his life by not making their relationship work, that he would undo it if he could. She spent those same years writing a book about how complicated the relationship had actually been, how much of herself she had lost inside it, and how glad she was to have eventually found her way out. They were describing the same relationship. They were describing it in ways that had almost nothing in common. And the fact that she outlived him means her version is the one that now gets to exist without a rebuttal. She was not glad he was dead. She was glad he did not have to be hurt by her truth, and those are different things. How they found each other and why it happened so fast. The meeting between Sally Field and Burt Reynolds in 1977 was not accidental in the way that some Hollywood romances present themselves as chance encounters. Reynolds actively wanted her for the film that would eventually become the project connecting them. The movie was Smokey and the Bandit, a car chase comedy that was already being developed around Reynolds' enormous box office presence, and when it came to casting his love interest, he fought for Sally over the objections of filmmakers who had other ideas. The objection, as Reynolds later described it, was that Sally was not considered conventionally glamorous enough for the role. The industry's idea of what a leading lady next to the biggest male star of the moment should look like did not automatically land on Sally Field, who had spent years being typecast as perky and wholesome in ways that the film industry struggled to translate into the specifically sexualized idea of desirability it was looking for. Reynolds disagreed with that assessment directly and specifically. He pushed back by connecting attractiveness to something other than conventional appearance, arguing that genuine talent registers as appealing in ways that no amount of surface-level glamour can replicate. He got his way. She was cast. And then something happened on that set that neither of them had entirely anticipated, even though Reynolds had already been drawn to her before they met. The chemistry between them was immediate and overwhelming. Sally described it in interviews years later as instantaneous, the kind of connection where days felt like years because the emotional intensity compressed time. Reynolds described the same experience in his memoir, noting that the tension between them on set was impossible to ignore and impossible to manage professionally. They were in a movie about people running from the law, and they were falling for each other in real time between takes. The context around this matters. Both of them had been through marriages that ended. Sally had been married to her high school sweetheart, a man named Stephen Craig, for 7 years before that relationship dissolved. She had 2 sons from that marriage. Reynolds had been married briefly and had his own complicated romantic history. Neither of them was arriving at this connection without prior experience of how relationships could go wrong. And yet the speed of their connection overrode whatever caution that experience might have produced. Sally has been honest about the fact that she fell fast and that the falling felt like something she could not have stopped, even if she had recognized at the time what was happening. The attraction to Reynolds was real. The feeling of finally being seen and wanted by someone with that level of presence and confidence was real. What was also real, though she did not fully understand it yet, was that the same qualities that made him magnetic were the qualities that were going to make the relationship genuinely difficult to be inside. The relationship that started on that film set would last almost 5 years. During those 5 years, Sally would win an Emmy and her first Oscar. She would also slowly disappear as a person inside a relationship that took up more space than she did. Both of those things happened at the same time, and understanding that coexistence is the key to understanding the whole story. What the relationship actually felt like from inside it. The public version of Sally Field and Burt Reynolds in the late 1970s was one of the most appealing celebrity romances of that era. They were both at the peak of their respective careers. They were visibly affectionate with each other in public appearances. The films they made together performed well at the box office, which meant their professional collaboration and their personal relationship reinforced each other in ways the industry and the audience found satisfying. From the outside, it looked like 2 talented people who had found each other at exactly the right moment. From the inside, according to Sally's own account, it was something considerably more complicated from very early on. Reynolds was controlling in ways that extended into Sally's professional life and personal identity. One specific incident she described publicly stands out as a clear illustration of how that control operated. When Sally was nominated for and ultimately won an Emmy Award for her performance in the television film Sybil in 1976, Reynolds did not want her to attend the ceremony. The reasons he gave and the way he expressed his objection were consistent with a pattern Sally identified in retrospect as a man who felt threatened by her success in ways he could not fully admit, even to himself. She won the Emmy. The performance in Sybil was the moment that shifted the entire trajectory of her career, establishing her as a serious dramatic actress rather than a comedic television personality. Reynolds had, by his own later account, also encouraged her to take the role in Norma Ray in 1979, which earned her first Academy Award. So there was a version of events in which he was supporting her career. But Sally's experience of those years was of a man who both pushed her toward professional success and punished her for having it, which is a particular kind of contradiction that is exhausting to live inside. His prescription medication use was also a real and present feature of the relationship. Reynolds had been dealing with dependency issues that affected his behavior in ways that were not always predictable. Sally has described managing those circumstances as part of the texture of daily life with him, which added another layer of caretaking to a dynamic that was already unequal in ways she was only beginning to recognize. The dependency ran in both directions, though not symmetrically. Sally has described herself as having been a caretaker in the relationship, someone who oriented her entire existence around what he needed, what he wanted, how he was feeling. She dressed for him, carried herself for him, filtered her own desires through what she believed he wanted to see. She described it later as the experience of gradually ceasing to exist as herself and becoming something more like a supporting character in someone else's story. Reynolds proposed to her multiple times during those years. She turned him down every time, not because she did not love him, but because she understood, even then, that something was not right about the dynamic between them. She knew in the part of herself that was still paying attention beneath the attachment that his proposals were not coming from a place of genuine readiness to build a life together. She said later that she believed they would have made each other miserable in a marriage in ways that even the difficulty of the relationship they had managed to prevent. She was right about that. She was just not quite ready yet to fully act on what she knew. The childhood that shaped everything she brought to that relationship. To understand why Sally Field stayed in a relationship she could see was hurting her, you have to understand something about her life before Burt Reynolds ever existed in it. Because the patterns she identified in her relationship with Reynolds did not originate with him. They were formed much earlier, in circumstances that were considerably darker, and Reynolds stepped into grooves that had already been worn into her sense of herself long before they met. Her mother remarried after her parents divorced, and the man who entered the household was Jock Mahoney, a stuntman and actor who went by a nickname. He was physically imposing, charismatic in the specific way that very confident men can be, and capable of making a family feel safe and entertained in ways that made his presence seem like a gift rather than a threat. Sally has described him as someone who was magnetic and capable of genuine warmth, which is exactly what made what he did so difficult to process. Starting when Sally was very young and continuing through her early teenage years, Mahoney mistreated her in ways that Sally did not speak about publicly until 2012, when she addressed it directly in an interview. She described it in her memoir with specificity, not for the purpose of making it a defining characteristic of who she is, but because she understood that it was formative in ways that continued to shape her relationship choices well into adulthood. The specific impact she suffered as a child created a set of emotional patterns that she carried into her adult relationships without fully recognizing them as patterns. The experience of being in a relationship with someone who could be both genuinely loving and genuinely unhealthy at the same time, someone whose charm and emotional power made it difficult to maintain clear judgment, was not new to her when she met Burt Reynolds. She had been navigating that specific dynamic since childhood. She has been careful and thoughtful about how she discusses this because she is not interested in reducing her entire life to a story of damage. She is interested in understanding herself honestly, and honest understanding required acknowledging that her childhood left her predisposed to certain kinds of relationships and certain patterns of responding within them. Recognizing that predisposition is what eventually allowed her to break out of it. What she described as the experience of being with Reynolds was the sensation of being in a familiar emotional space without understanding why it felt familiar. The caretaking, the walking on eggshells around his moods, the subordination of her own needs to his, the way his approval felt necessary in ways that were out of proportion to what any adult relationship should require. All of these registered as uncomfortable, but also as somehow normal. They felt like home, in the specific way that patterns formed in childhood always feel like home, regardless of whether that home was healthy. The relationship with Reynolds was, she has said, a place where she was trying to resolve something that had not been resolved in her earliest years. She was trying to make the dynamic work this time. She was trying to turn the story into something different. It took years and significant personal work to understand that the story needed to end rather than be rewritten. How it ended, what came after, and the regret he carried to his death. The relationship between Sally Field and Burt Reynolds ended around 1982, after approximately 5 years. The specific circumstances of the ending were connected to Reynolds' infidelities, which had been rumored for some time before they became undeniable. Sally has described the experience of learning about his behavior with other women as humiliating in the specific way that public betrayal is humiliating, where the private wound is compounded by the awareness that other people know about it too. She described receiving confirmation of his behavior from an unexpected source. Her grandmother, who began mailing her clippings from tabloid coverage of Reynolds' activities. That detail is one of the more quietly devastating images in the whole story. The person who had raised her sending newspaper clippings about the man she loved, because the evidence of his behavior was so public that even her grandmother was encountering it. After the split, Sally moved forward in ways that Reynolds did not. She married a film producer named Alan Greisman in 1984. 2 years after the relationship ended. They had a son together and remained married until 1994. She continued building the film career that Reynolds had always claimed to support, winning her second Academy Award for Places in the Heart in 1984. She became one of the most respected actresses of her generation. Reynolds' trajectory after the split was different. He married actress Lonnie Anderson in 1988. That marriage ended badly in 1994, in circumstances that included public accusations of serious misconduct on both sides. His career, which had been at an extraordinary peak in the 1970s and early 80s, declined significantly through the late 80s and 90s. He never stopped thinking about Sally. He wrote about her in his memoir published in 2015 as the person he should not have let go, describing the loss of the relationship as his biggest personal failure. He expressed in interviews a regret that was genuine and visible and had clearly not diminished with time. He said he did not understand why he had done what he did. He wondered what she thought about him. He said he would have welcomed a phone call. She never called. He died in September of 2018 at 82 years old from a heart attack. Sally was among the first people to release a public statement following his death. She called him by a childhood nickname and described the time they spent together as something that never leaves her mind. She said he would always exist in her history and in her heart. Those words were warm. They were also chosen carefully by a woman who had already written and was about to publish a very different account of what those years had actually contained. Both things were true at the same time. She had genuinely loved him. She had also genuinely been affected by the relationship. The two facts coexisted, the way they do in most real love stories that end badly. Burt Reynolds spent 30 years calling Sally Field the love of his life, while she spent those same years processing how much the relationship had cost her. What does it say about how differently two people can live inside the exact same story? Thanks for watching. If this story was moving for you, smash that like button, subscribe for more untold Hollywood tales, and hit the bell so you never miss a drop. Want more? Check out another one of our videos. You never know what you'll discover next.